here tonight, and Senator Luther Olson stopped by. Luther. And I do have to tell you that Luther is a true friend of education. Not that he always agrees with everything that we want to do, but at least he thinks things through and has good reasons for doing what he does. And I've never been unable to talk to Luther and have a good conversation. So Luther, thank you for all that you do for education. And when I found out he was coming this afternoon, it took me about a half hour to change the PowerPoint so that but I think I got it all taken care of. Once again, thanks for having me here tonight. I do feel like I'm in a room full of friends, so this will be rather informal. I do know most of you, and I think this is my third time here. When I was called, I think it was back in June sometime, I was asked to give a title to the presentation. My first thought was, you know, what's hot in education in June isn't exactly who knows what might be happening in October. So I thought we'd title at the time, Hot Topics in Education. As you know, education is important to everyone, and there's always something going on, something to talk about. Tonight, I'm going to, I put together a list of different things that may look like they're separate entities to begin with, separate discussions, but as we go through, it's my hope that we tie them all together. I'm going to talk about student demographics. You know, what does it look like in the school district of Waupaca? What does it look like in the state of Wisconsin? Talk about the type of students we have in the school district of Waupaca, which are pretty consistent with the numbers and types of students across schools in Wisconsin as well. I will talk about curriculum. As you know, model academic standards is what we're moving to, the Common Core standards. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and why I think that's a good idea. Talk about assessment. How do we know that curriculum is working, and how do we compare ourselves to other school districts? And then I'll talk about accountability, which is how do we compare ourselves to other states and even other countries. School funding, also always a fun topic. Touch on that a little bit. And I do have a number of sources. I did steal this information from places like Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance. Todd Berry gave a presentation a couple of weeks ago, and I took some things from him. Wisconsin State Journal, Department of Public Instruction, American Association of School District Administrators, United States Department of Education. So I'm not claiming that this information is all mine or that, that I'm responsible for all this. I just tried to pull it together. So let's start with our student demographics. What does the state look like in terms of enrollments? And in the state, this graph or slide shows that the population of students is going to slow or has been slowing. This is 1950s through the year 2040. This is from Todd Berry of the Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance. But as you can see, the rate of growth, that's the numbers across here. The rate of growth is slowing down. So actually, what we're going to see is a leveling off of the projected population in Wisconsin. Now, the reason for that, you can see here, number of births are, that would be the red. Leveling off, and look what's going to be happening through 2040 with the number of deaths in Wisconsin. You can see that we have a narrowing of those two lines. This graph looks at the working population in counties in Wisconsin. The red means that the working population ages 20 to 64 is declining more than 10%. And you can see Waupaca right in the middle. Through the year 2040, we've got a decline. We're a little bit of an island, a little less decline, less than 10% surrounding us. The green, the light green, less than 10% increase, and dark green, more than 10%. So we look at Waupaca County and we see that, consistent with what I showed you before, we'll be having a decreased working age population. I want to talk a little bit about School District Waupaca. I know this is hard to read, so I'm going to give you the numbers. This is 2007. We take counts every September and every January. So we have this third Friday in September count, second Friday in January count. 2007, third Friday in September, we had 2,390 students in the school district of Waupaca. In the high school alone, we had 864. That's pretty much the peak of where we were. 875 is about the most students we had in the 4th-grade high school in Waupaca. This takes us to the third Friday in September of this year, and our total enrollment is 2,205. And our high school enrollment, which is significant because, well, it's 675, which is about 200 students less than we were in 2007. If you think about our classes, each class is roughly 200 kids. That's what we were at one time, 4 times 200, 800 students. Now we're down an entire class. It's like an entire class of students have left us since 2007. So quite a decline. And the reason I point that out in the high school now, it's taken that long for that decrease in enrollment to hit the high school levels. We experienced in Waupaca a number of years ago a plateau. Our classes were 200, averaging 195, 205, right around 200 every year. All of a sudden, we had a class of 165, and that 165 stayed. Every year after that, it was right around 165. So for the last 10 years, we've been graduating about 200 students, bringing in a kindergarten class of approximately 165. In fact, earlier we've had kindergarten classes as low as 142. As those move through the system, we still have the 200s moving through the high school. So we've been pretty big at the high school all along until the last 3 or 4 years when those classes are now moving into the high school. You can see it's our largest class in the high school now is 176. That would be the sophomore class. But coming in from middle school, we've got 153, 177, 153, 150, and then in 5th grade, we've got 139. That's that small class. So when you total those together, it's quite a decrease in our high school enrollment. Some other statistics relative to enrollment, open enrollment, which probably 10 years now it's been in place. We're roughly even, have about 115 students moving out through open enrollment and about 115 students moving in. What's a little bit deceiving about the students moving out, many of those students were homeschooled students at one time, so they weren't on our radar. We don't even know about them. In order for them to open enroll to a virtual school, which many of them do instead of homeschooling, they can now enroll in our school district and then open enroll out to a virtual school, whether it be McFarland or Appleton or Grantsburg. They can go to one of those virtual schools then, but they have to enroll with us first. So we never had them. Now all of a sudden they are with us, and now they're moving out through open enrollment. But that's why we get to be about the 115 in both directions. Those aren't all virtual school enrollments, though. Some are going to Waupaca. We've got some to Iola, some to Amherst. And in turn, we have some students from those districts coming into our school. Contrary to what I think the intent of the statute was in the beginning, that people will move for educational reasons, I would say the bulk of our students who are moving either in or out are doing so because of convenience. The family works in the other school district, transportation, things like that. It's not and probably the more prevalent one might be athletics. They get to participate in a different school. But there are very few who say, well, we want to go to Waupaca because of the educational, come right out and say that, or we want to go to Waupaca because of the educational advantage, et cetera. We trace a lot of it back to convenience, which works out well for them also. Homeschooled students, we have roughly 71 students registered with the DPI as homeschooled students. That number was about 54, I think, 10 or so years ago, so it hasn't really grown a whole lot. Economically disadvantaged, a little bit more about our student population. Economically disadvantaged is defined as students who are eligible for free or reduced lunch. School District of Waupaca in 1996, we had 19.4% of our students were considered economically disadvantaged, enrolling in our free or reduced lunch program. 2011, that number is 41.7%. Last year, we were about 44%. This year, we're down just a little bit below that. We're back to around the 41% State of Wisconsin, you can see similar numbers, 21.8% in 96 and 42% in 2011. Now, this you're going to have to watch closely. This is, it'll keep going back and forth, but this picture of Wisconsin is showing the proportion of students on free and reduced lunch, starting in year 2000 and ending in year 2012. So the darker red means 50% or more free or reduced lunch. The very light color is 10 to 20%. So you can see what's happening in the state of Wisconsin from the year 2000 through 2011, I think it is, 11 or 12. The last one was 2012. You can see how red the state has become. And that means school districts with 50% or more of students in free and reduced lunch. So that's a picture, demonstration of the growth of poverty in Wisconsin as it relates to students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. Now, here are two maps of Wisconsin. The one on the left is the percentage change in membership. The darker the red, it means the more students those school districts lost over a period of time, or the students who are losing. This is a 2000 base to 2012, the districts that are losing members. So it goes from the dark red being the largest loss of population to the dark green, meaning a gain of population in student enrollment during that time. Overlay that on top of the free and reduced lunch for 2012 on the right. It is pretty clear that you have the students who are losing enrollments, the schools that are losing enrollment are also the higher percentage of students with free and reduced lunch.
Mary Ellen. Question, doesn't the poverty level, isn't that established by, who establishes that? The state of Wisconsin, federal government?
It's a federal government program.
And hasn't that lowered, hasn't that gotten higher? Indicating that there would be an increase in the, in other words, they can make more money and still be under the poverty level.
Yes, that number is not a static number from 2000 through 2012. That number changes. Yes, so the eligibility for that does change from year to year. Bottom line is they're still eligible for free and reduced, and that's what this is showing. So again, the schools that are losing population, losing enrollment, are the, I'm going to tie all this together later on. There's a real connection between educational achievement and poverty, and we're going to see that a little bit later. Poverty and performance. Well, here's a little bit later. Very strong correlation between poverty and school performance. As you can see on this graph, these are the schools that fail to meet expectations on our school report card. So a number of factors go into that, from test performance to graduation rates to attendance, et cetera. These are the schools, the red, they fail to meet expectations. And you can see most of those schools are 75% or higher economically disadvantaged students. As you move over to the right, these schools meet few expectations, and again, many of them are located near the top of the chart. 50% free and reduced is right through the middle. Third column then, the scores start moving down. Those are the schools that meet expectations, and there are some very high performing schools meeting expectations in the 100% poverty rate, but there are fewer. The trend line is down, exceeds expectations, and significantly exceeds expectations in the purple. School District Waupaca is right about there with us meeting expectations, and approximately 40 to 45% are free and reduced lunch. Those are all schools in Wisconsin. What we need to do is find out what are some of these schools that are performing very well. What are they doing? We did that a number of years ago in Waupaca. In-service day, we had our teachers go through an experience of being a family breadwinner or the head of a family who had to go through, they were assigned an income or a level of poverty, and they had to spend a day in the shoes of someone in that level of poverty. whether it be the parents or the students. And really had to take it upon themselves to think, okay, is this child who's coming to school hungry or coming to school with the parents fighting or whatever might be happening at home, not knowing where their next meal is coming from, are they going to be able to focus on education? And how do we try to teach those kids differently, try to meet those needs, understand their needs so we can teach them differently? That one experience significantly raised our scores on the students who are free and reduced because of just understanding what their situation is and how they learn differently than students who are coming from a two-parent successful family. So it can be done, and we just need to focus a little bit more on doing that. That's the one side of it. I'm going to show you, I'm going to get through the demographics first. Racial change. This is proportions of students of color in Wisconsin, 1997 through 2019. You can see here I'm going to have to tell you that this line here is the Hispanic population. The one that's going through the roof is Hispanic. The others are Asian and Black and Native American. I think Native American's here. Black might be here and Asian up there. But this is the one that's growing, even though the numbers are pretty small across Wisconsin, the one growing the most is the Hispanic population. Here is the racial composition of categories. Remember I talked about those different categories. It fails to meet expectations up through significantly exceeds. That's our school's report card. That's how we're being reported now. But if you can see the bottom, the blue percent of American Indian, these are the ones failing to meet expectations. That's pretty consistent across the first three groups. It gets smaller, and we've got pretty much 0% Native Americans significantly exceeding. The next one, Asian. Again, we have a large, considering the numbers, we have a large percent in significantly exceeds, but we do have some spread across here. This is the one, the percent Black population failing to meet expectations. And what you're seeing here is what Tony Evers at DPI calls the gap. When he says we need to close the achievement gap, he's saying these students need to be focused on so we can start moving them over to the right. It's the achievement gap is the gap between how white students perform and how Black students perform. And remember, all this is coming in relation to how Wisconsin is being measured state by state across the United States and even from country to country. Another demographic is our special education population. 1996, about 11% students considered special ed. 2011, about 13.8. So it's pretty steady. It's not as much as I would have expected, and I'll point out why in just a minute. State of Wisconsin pretty much parallels the school district of Waupaca in those enrollments. I want to talk about autism. There's a category, other health impaired. Autism is getting to be a significant concern, a significant challenge in the school district of Waupaca. Autism is a neurological disorder, 5-to-1 ratio of boys to girls. Prevalence, Center for Disease Control says in 1990, 1 in 10,000 children were born suffered from autism. Now we're at 1 in 88. From 1 in 10,000 in 1990 to 2012, we're 1 in 88. That 23% increase is from 2006 to 2012. And that pretty much parallels our experience in the school district of Waupaca. Autistic students are along a spectrum. There are some who are way to the right, some way to the left. They're still considered autistic. They have a diagnosis that way. We have some students who have a full-time staff member assigned to them. It may not be a teacher, but it may be an aide. Follows them from room to room throughout the day in order to help them learn and to try to teach them behavior, teach them skills that they can control their own behavior. But it's a significant increase. This is information from 2012. I read recently that the number is even greater than 1 in 88 now and is not heading any other direction anytime soon.
Do you see that as identification, increase accuracy of identification?
No, part of it is, but I've been in this long enough to know that some of the behaviors that are being exhibited are very different than they were 20 years ago. It's just that it's not that we didn't know what to call it back then. There wasn't anything to call that. Since then, the behaviors, the obviousness of autism has gotten much greater. I can't deny that some of it is identification. We didn't know how to identify, especially the ones on the lower end of the spectrum. But it would be too convenient to say this population ratio existed 20 years ago. We just didn't know what to call it. That's not the case. Other health impaired is the other category. What we used to call special ed, we're becoming better at identifying. So now there is a category called other health impaired. And I just want to walk you through a day in our school's nurse's office. Average daily attendance in the nurse office for health-related issues at the elementary school is 57. Middle school, we have 30. High school, 35. If you look at the average daily PRN, needed medications, 30 at the elementary, 25 at the middle school, and 35 at the high school. We give medications daily for students with ADD, anxiety, bipolar depression, OCD, and aggression. Those are the most frequent flyers. District-wide, we have 200 students diagnosed with asthma. They carry rescue inhalers, or they keep the inhalers in one of the health rooms. Over 60 students with severe food allergies that could result in life-threatening reactions, require epinephrine. 32 students have stinging insect allergies requiring emergency medication. Students with seizure disorders who have orders for rectal Valium be given if a seizure occurs. 6 students with diabetes, this was last year, who need insulin administered during the day, blood sugars monitored, and food intake calculated. We have more students than that this year, and they are spread out across our buildings. And it's the noon hour where they need that attention. That's one of the reasons, I'm not saying the only one, by far not the only one, but one of the reasons we hired a second school nurse this year. So that's our student demographics. That's what our student population looks like. What I'd like to do now is, and like I said, I'm zipping through this and going to try to tie them in, but I want to talk about standards and curriculum. It's a hot topic. Obviously, especially a little while ago, I think we're moving on. But standards, when we talk about the Common Core standards, people confuse standards with curriculum. I've heard Luther talk about this and defend this many times. But standards are what you want your students to know, be able to do at each grade level, and they indicate a minimum. So the Common Core standards say by the time students are done with 3rd grade, they need to know this. That's a minimum. That does not mean that we can't teach them more than that. It's not a ceiling, it's the bottom. We always have taught them more than the minimum. We'll continue to do that. The curriculum is different. The Common Core doesn't say anything about curriculum. Those are the resources and strategies we use to teach to the expectations set by the standards. We've had model academic standards since 1998 in the state of Wisconsin. We're moving to the Common Core for a number of reasons. It just seems logical. And I'll go. Sometimes in education we can't win. We've got the argument that we don't compare well with other states. We say, well, look at our scores in WKCE, we perform really well. Someone will always say, yes, but WKCE doesn't test the same thing that other states are testing, and they're performing better than Wisconsin. So if we go to the Common Core, and let's just say, for example, we have Common Core curriculum across the United States, it doesn't make any difference. A student can go from Wisconsin to Illinois to South Dakota and get the same standards, have the same standards when they leave 3rd grade here and go to 3rd grade in the middle of the year. They're learning the same language, the same standards. That seems to make sense. You know how our population is now and moving from one state to another, much less one school district to another. It's happening all the time. We need consistency going across student who comes from Illinois to Wisconsin and takes the test in Wisconsin, if they've been learning a different curriculum or a different standard in Wisconsin, they're not going to test very well. So we're looking for that consistency across the borders. So at some point then we can say, yes, we compare apples to apples when we look at Minnesota and Wisconsin, or Georgia and Wisconsin. We're comparing apples to apples in how students are performing. I'm going to give you an example here of comparison. The old Wisconsin model academic standards for math, these are the ones in 1988. Number operations and relationships content standard. Same standard K through 12, okay, that doesn't differentiate from grade level, but the standard is use numbers effectively for various purposes such as counting, measuring, estimating, and problem solving. Okay, that's the Wisconsin Model Academic Standard developed in 1998. Common Core State Standard for Mathematics. And this is one of over 20 Common Core State Standards, but this one has different grade level, kindergarten. Understand addition as putting together and adding to, and understand the subtraction as taking apart and taking from. Pretty simple. But then we get to first grade and there's another standard, and second grade and third grade, until you get to the related standard in high school says, understand solving equations as a process of reasoning and explain the reasoning. That's the difference between our current or our just previous model academic standards and the Common Core. Common Core are much, as it states up here, they're world-class standards, they're clearer standards, and they're more specific. I'm not going to go to English language arts is pretty much the same thing, so I'm not going to go into the difference is the same, although we use different language. But what I do want to spend a little bit of time, a sample test question, and go to math. I can make this a little bit bigger, but I'm going to read it for you just because I think it's important. But here's a test question. And you can see, as I was talking to someone earlier, the new math standards, they're problem-solving standards. They're not, you don't isolate algebra, which is separate from geometry, which is separate from trigonometry. They use all the different areas of math in order to solve problems. But here's the problem. Mr. Barnes, the theater teacher at Lamont Elementary School, is planning for the annual spring musical. He took a survey to find out how many students in each grade would most like to act, sing, or dance. The chart represents his findings. So students are reading charts. They're going to be making graphs, creating graphs in order to get information. Mr. Barnes also wanted to know how many students would be interested in helping backstage with lights, sound, and costumes. He wrote down the number of interested students, but he lost the information, wouldn't you know. He remembers that in first grade, 20 students were interested. Twice as many students were interested in second grade. Third and fourth grade had the same number of interested students, but the number was 5 less than the second grade. The number of interested students in fourth grade was 5 times the number of interested students in fifth grade. So fill in the blanks. Now, that's pretty basic. The next part, the art teacher agrees to help. That was the first mistake. That's okay, I like art teachers. Most of the costumes can be found in storage, but she wants to supplement what's available with extra fabric. Mrs. Keys says that for grades 1 through 3, she'll need 1/8 yard of purple fabric for every singer, 1/6 yard of black fabric for every actor, 1/2 yard of blue fabric for every dancer. For the singers, dancers, and actors in grades 4 or 5, she'll need twice as much fabric as she needs for the singers, dancers, and actors in grades 1 through 3. You can see where this is going. They talk about the stage layout and then get to, those are the answers, by the way, of the first question. But if each of the 254 students who performs on stage has 3 friends come to see the musical, each of the 137 students working backstage has 2 friends, how many total audience members will there be? And the students have to figure that out. You can see, I mean, it does, this one, Mr. Barnes has a scene to be performed by 5 actors. He wants the scene to be performed by actors in the same grade, but he doesn't want anyone to act twice. Which grade can perform the scene, and how many times will the scene be performed so that everyone can have a chance to perform? Now, there's the answer, but they say possible explanations. Again, get to the answer, you're asked to explain how you got to that answer, to tell if you really understand what the mathematic concept's going on behind it. Anybody want to guess what grade level this test question is from?
High school.
Try 4th grade. This is Smarter Balanced Assessment, which is the assessment that tests our students on what they learn through the Common Core. Okay, so there's a connection between how they're going to be assessed and what we're teaching. So if we talk about eliminating the Common Core but continue with standards with the Smarter Balanced Assessment, we're teaching something different than we're testing. And it just doesn't make sense. That's why it all has to go together. But this is a 4th grade question from the Smarter Balanced Assessment. Accountability. Program for International Student Assessment, National Assessment for Educational Progress, TIMS, Trends in International Mathematics and Science. Those are some of the more common accountability assessments, ways that we're compared across the United States as well as across the world. You've all seen these types of reports. U.S. is falling behind in education compared to other countries. Pretty sexy, isn't it? You read that headline, that's something you're going to remember. We're failing in the United States compared to other countries. But you fail to take into consideration, and by the way, we're trying to teach critical thinking to our students. First question I would ask if I were given this report would be, are we comparing apples to apples? Okay? Are same students being tested? Are they all being tested on the same thing? That's critical thinking. I would first question that. How accurate is this? Turns out that number one, they don't take the diversity of U.S. students into account, and other countries only test very select students. We test students of all race and poverty level. There's a difference right there. China, they have like 12 provinces or 12 different areas that they're testing. They take the top 3 and report them. The others don't get reported out of China. Yet we end up looking like we're not doing as well. Remember poverty and its effect on student learning? Single greatest factor limiting student achievement. If you look at this graph, over here you have the total of students' performance right here the number of students in this group versus number of students in that group, the total performance in the 1 to 5% of students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch, total performance is here. As the increase in free and reduced lunch goes to the right to more than 75%, the average is brought down to where it was up here. It's now brought down to the lower common denominator, students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch, and that's because of the numbers. Now, that's NAEP data, National Assessment of Educational Progress. That's across the country. So what we see in Wisconsin, as I explained before, we're seeing across the country when you start measuring poverty. U.S. schools are not failing all students. If you take the 15-year-olds in schools with fewer than 10% of kids eligible for free or reduced lunch, we outperform even the famously excellent Finns. So if you disaggregate that data and just take our kids who are comparable to the other countries in terms of poverty, we're number 1. U.S. schools where fewer than 25% are impoverished by the same measure beat all 34 of the relatively affluent countries studied except South Korea and Finland. And then schools where 25 to 50% were poor, free and reduced, we still beat most other countries in reading. Those statistics you don't hear, they don't make the headlines. I'm going to move on to school funding. That was one of the topics, and I think I'm doing okay so far. We talk about school funding in school district Waupaca. We're very unique in Waupaca. We're unique because we're we're the number 4 in a number of school districts in the state of Wisconsin who tax below the revenue limit. Now, if you remember, many years ago, the legislature said, okay, we're going to pay 2/3 of your funding, but we're going to put a cap on revenue. The revenue you receive is going to be a combination of your property tax and your state aid. So you've got that, those two are capped. If your state aid goes up, your property tax has to come down. The total of those can only meet a certain amount. For a number of years, pretty much every school district in the state was saying we're going to tax to the max. That was the phrase that was being used. We're going to tax as much as we can because we don't know what's going to happen next year. They might take more funding away. We want to have some stability in programming, so we're going to tax whether we really need it or not. We're going to tax to the max. Those are pretty relatively smaller numbers we were talking about. As years went by, School District Waupaca said, you know, plus there was a change in the legislation that said, used to be that if you don't tax for that money, you can't get it the next year. You lose it. You know, so it's no longer available. There's a change in legislation that said, yeah, you can carry over that money, at least most of it from year to year. So once we knew we could carry that over, we didn't have to tax to the max. We could just tax to what we really needed, knowing we had that cushion available to us later on. Well, over the years, we've accumulated that money. You've all heard about a number of school districts around here across the state saying, we need to go to referendum in order to get money to exceed the revenue cap. Those schools are at the revenue cap. They get their state aid reduced, and they've got no more money to get. They can't get any more money, so they go to the taxpayers, similar to wanting to build a new building, and say, we need more money. Usually they say, we need more money because our roofs are leaking, or we need to replace our boilers. Really, where you get that money from, where you put that money to is really a decision that you make, because it all comes from the taxpayer anyway. But they're using that. We haven't had to do that. And in fact, we are, I think I've got the numbers here. We're about 2.7 million underneath the cap right now. So if we had to, if the legislature came and said, we're taking away all your state aid, we could still come to you for 2.7 million and not have to go to referendum for it, but use it for operations. Hopefully we don't have to do that. We're not looking at that. But this is our history of state aid loss over the last, since 2009, 10, 8-9 school year. Total is about $4 million. Now, this accumulates. You know, the loss of this 300,000 one year adds up to the, then there's a loss the next year that accumulates. And we're at about $4 million lost in state aid over the last 4 or 5 years. Of that, $4 million, we've come back to you and said, okay, we're losing the state aid, but we don't need all of it. We've only accumulated an additional $3 million from you due to our loss of $4 million in state aid. If you round it out, it's close to that $2 million, $2.7 million. I know 3 and 5 doesn't equal 2.7, but it's not supposed to. Yeah, right. It's not supposed to. But I'm just saying there's a correlation between how much money we leave on the table in the revenue cap and how much we're not getting back from you through the revenue cap ability to get back from you from property taxes. Number 4 in the state in the number of dollars we're leaving on the table by not taxing to the max. And I think that says quite a bit for our school district. We have excellent facilities that were built in 2000 and they're still excellent. You walk through those today and you can't tell that they were built 14, 15 years ago. We have a good educational product that we're putting out, and our cost per student, and that's another thing I always get is, well, of course you're spending less. You've got fewer students. Just look at that chart we had before. But we don't measure by that. We measure by our cost per student, not overall. Our cost per student is significantly under the cost per student, and I mean significantly to me is over $200 under cost per student in the CESA 5 average, which takes us from Portage up to Marshfield. All those school districts, we're in the CESAs because we're pretty similar to those districts. The average, we're over $200 per student. Now you take that $200, multiply it by 2,200 students, that's a significant amount of money that we are not spending every year on a per pupil average. Take surrounding school districts, we do even better if you take the districts right around us. So I've been trying to teach that message or preach that message. But it's really important to tell you that now because we've got our budget hearing coming up. We lost an additional $500,000 of state aid from last year to this year. We're going to recoup some of that. We're still going to leave over $2 million on the table untaxed to you. But you're going to see a significant raise in the rate. It's going to be about $60 per $100,000 of value. That's more than we've had in the past, but we're continuing to see that erosion of state aid. And let me explain a little bit about the state aid formula. It's extremely complicated. There are whole courses in state aid formula. I don't know that anyone could tell you exactly what moves it, but one of the factors is property value. But it's not just simply property value. We have relatively high property value in Waupaca. You're familiar with that when you look at an average. Our property value has either sustained or gone down less than property value in some of the other places in Wisconsin. So those places where they lose more property value, they end up getting more state aid. But the key is, it's a double whammy. The equalization aid formula takes into account the property value behind each student. When we had 2,700 students divided by the property value, okay, you've got that level. Now we've got 2,200 students divided by that same property value. We've got much more property value. We've become much richer of a school district because we lost students. So the property value behind each student is getting higher because we're losing students. So that affects the amount of state aid we get. That's why we've lost $4 million. One of the reasons we've lost $4 million over the last 4 or 5 years. I will campaign for a change in the funding formula, not just because of what's happening in Waupaca, because I don't think it's fair. I don't think you feel that much richer or that much more capable of paying taxes. We need to start looking at ability to pay. We need to start looking at different factors. And because there's nothing better out there right now, I still promote Tony Evers' fair funding formula, which does take into account poverty levels and things other than property value in state aid. Just getting state aid. So let me talk a little bit about voucher schools, and then I think we'll be ready, pretty close for questions. 108 Milwaukee schools participating in the Milwaukee voucher program. There are 146 voucher schools total across the state. Just to give you a reminder, voucher school, I know we get confused about homeschool, virtual school, voucher school, charter school, and all those different terms. But a voucher school is a family can get, I think it's $6,000 some right now to send their child to a parochial or private school. Started out in Milwaukee, was expanded last year. So there are 146 voucher schools now total across the state. My understanding, although I haven't seen it in writing yet, is that Governor Walker would like to open that voucher program. Any student in Wisconsin who wants to go to a parochial school will get $6,000 to go to that parochial or private school. This year, approximately $210 million budgeted for all voucher school students. Headline in today's paper, Wisconsin State Journal. If this doesn't get your attention. State paid $139 million to schools that have since been terminated from the voucher program since 2004. That's $140 million that went to schools that don't exist anymore. They don't exist because they couldn't provide the proper curriculum. They couldn't get their books right. They couldn't do what they needed to do in order to maintain their voucher status. Some of those people, you've heard the story, they're living in Florida in a gated community now because they took this money, school failed, and off they went. And now they're trying to start a voucher school down in Florida where they live. I know there's talk, and I think Luther may have even been quoted in this article about saying, yeah, we need some standards for allowing schools to accept voucher money. Maybe they ought to be in business for about 2 years before they are able to take this money from the state. So there's some things that we can do to fix that. But you know, it gets your attention when you start, oh, I didn't take them. I've got a list of those schools. Some are some really different named schools that the first thing you look at is say, whoa, wait a minute, where did they come from, and how did they start up, and how are they taking our money, your money, and running with it? That's $140 million. That's been tossed away. And now they want to expand that program across the state. You ought to be concerned about that, I think. So this is the summary. 50 schools failed to submit required reports or improperly claimed summer school payments or financial viability issues, et cetera. Those are the schools that were terminated and walked away, or didn't walk away. The money was spent, for the most part, was spent trying to educate students, but they just couldn't do it. I'm going to end with this. Back to the good old days. I keep hearing it all the time. Well, when I was in school, we used to do it this way. Why can't we do it that way now? 1900, 1910, we started teaching nutrition, immunization, and health in schools. 1910 to 1930, we added PHYED, practical arts, vocational education, mandated school transportation. 40s, we added business education, art, music, speech and drama, half-day kindergarten, school lunch. 50s, expanded science and math, safety, driver's ed, music and art education, stronger foreign language, sex education. 60s, advanced placement programs, Head Start, Title I, et cetera. I love the one at the bottom, peace, leisure, and recreation education. love those 60s. The 70s, the breakup in the American family accelerated. We added drug and alcohol abuse education, parenting education, behavior adjustment classes, character education, Title IX, et cetera. African American heritage, school breakfast programs, women's studies. 80s, we added a few things in the 80s. Then we came to the 90s, and we started talking about conflict resolution, peer mediation, bullying, HIV and AIDS education, CPR, homeless education, gangs, service learning. They're all things that are, we're familiar with many of them in the school district of Waupaca. 21st century, we've added No Child Left Behind. We know that one. Bully prevention, anti-harassment, organ donor education, personal financial literacy, a number of things. It's a long list, but they all have their merit. I'm not going to look at any one of those things and say, well, we shouldn't be doing this. We probably should be doing it, especially since in many cases a family's not doing it, someone has to. Think of the, when I talked about adding a second nurse before, what are we doing in the nursing and the health business in our schools? We've got a social worker. What are our schools doing with a social worker? That doesn't necessarily help us meet our math and science objectives. It does help the students live and be healthy. But we're taking a lot of things over that were originally intended for someone else to be taken care of, whether it be Department of Health and Human Services or the family. We are now doing many things on that list. And as it says here, you know the calendar, school calendar. We haven't added a whole lot of days or time to our calendar since the 1900s. We've always had summer vacation. We'll continue to have summer vacation. And our days are only as long as they are because we have to have football practice and basketball and those things as part of it. Right. I think it was Will Rogers. No one knows for sure. Education ain't what it used to be and never was. So I will open it up to questions. Yes?
What about year-round schooling?
What about it?
Well, is it a feasibility, a possibility? You hear a lot in the news about both sides of the story.
You do. And I'm not going to answer it with a yes or no answer. I think it depends what you mean by that. Year-round school, does that just mean you have the same number of days, but you've got your breaks broken up throughout the year, where you go 3 months on, 1 month off, 3 months on, 1 month off? And that's one way of doing year-round education. Unless you expand the number of hours they're meeting with students, going year-round or going just in 9 months and 3 months really doesn't make much difference. Not a whole lot of difference. Yes?
Where do you think Waupaca stands in the adoption of new technology, things like smart boards, computers for kids?
I would answer that even if our technology director wasn't sitting right back there. I would answer that and say I would put up our school second to none in how we incorporate technology into the everyday teaching and learning for every student. We have smart boards all over the place being used. They're not just there, they're being used. We have Chromebooks throughout our district that are being used instead of textbooks or in conjunction with textbooks. Our students are technology literate. And like I said, I will put up our technology up to just about anybody in the state. Could we do better? Yeah, and that's the direction we're going. But for what we have placed and being able to sustain that, we're doing very well. Yes?
Who came up with the Common Core? And who writes all that?
Yeah, the question is who came up with the Common Core and who writes all that? Depends who you want to believe. I think the truth is that a number of people, Bill Gates was the person who started and said, we need common standards across the country. But he got together members from the Governor's Council, members from higher ed, lower ed, parents, community members, and business people together to draft those standards. Are the standards perfect? No. But I don't expect them to be adopted today and be the same way they are 10 years from now they are today. But they're certainly a better start than we've got right now. That's best I can answer that. Yes?
Are the voucher school students and teachers, are they held up to the same standards like educator effectiveness, smarter balance assessment? Do they have to go through all of that the same as public education?
They do not.
So the question.
The question was, do the voucher schools, do the voucher schools, are they held to the same standards as public schools in terms of teacher effectiveness and accountability, taking tests, and are they sanctioned the same way public schools might be if they don't meet these things? And the answer is no. There have been many efforts to try to hold them accountable. I don't think we're done with that discussion yet. By the way, any one of these topics I talked about, I could give a whole evening on all alone. So I'm really trying to do this in as brief as I can. But the answer is no, they're not being held accountable to the same degree that public schools are. But I'm hoping that might change. Yes, Miles?
I was wondering, with the 1 out of 88 in autism, is there a difference in the different groups, the poverty, the different races, the Caucasians, the blacks?
You know, what they tell me is that, no, it's an equal opportunity.
Repeat the question.
I'm sorry. Is there differentiation of students, the 1 out of 88 students who have autism, is it falling in are those students falling in the poverty category, or are they falling in any particular category? And the answer is no, it's an equal opportunity neurological disorder. Yes?
I have another autism question. I understand it's a neurological disorder. When is that tested? Where is it tested?
When do we determine a student is autistic and is somewhere along the spectrum? Is it tested? When is it tested? We as a school district cannot. I don't think we can. No, we can't say this student is autistic. It has to be a physician who makes that determination. We can make a recommendation that the student be tested. Ages 1 to 3, we probably see signs of autism in kids, but it's not prevalent until age 4 or 5 and above, and that's when it's much easier to identify. That's my understanding. I'm not an expert in it, but that's what I read. Yes, Rose.
David, what about addressing ADHD or ADD? Yeah, I think some people confuse that.
ADD, attention deficit disorder, or ADHD, attention deficit hyper disorder, are two other disorders that, the best way I can describe it, I guess, that affect how students learn, how long they can pay attention, what they can learn, what conditions need to be present for them to learn optimally. That's not autism. That's a separate, what's the word, separate?
Syndrome?
Disorder. Yeah. Condition, separate condition. Yeah. But those numbers haven't gone down. That's when I talked about we used to call those special ed kids just because we didn't know what it was. And so our special ed population hasn't necessarily gone up, but our ADD and ADHD population has gone up because we no longer identify them as special ed, but other health impaired. Let's go with Pat.
Yeah, Dave, as many people know, Waupaca just entered into a 4-year-old program this year. It started off. If you could look into your crystal ball from your position, 5 to 10 years, a lot of people that are here tonight may not be involved in the educational system anymore, but where are we moving in terms of programs? Will the programs that we have now and additional ones be pretty comparable in terms of how the school looks and acts today, or you see some major changes coming?
You know, I don't know if this is where you're going with that, Pat, but let me answer it this way and see if that is. I see Cascade Network, our distance learning network, that's going to become more and more important in how we provide opportunities for kids who have special learning interests, who might want to learn Chinese, but we've only got 10 kids who want Chinese. They can go on our distance learning network and get Chinese from Xavier High School. We have teachers who teach advanced physics, AP, calculus, I should say. And students from other districts take that from Mr. Felt through our distance learning. That's only the tip of the iceberg. Where we're going beyond that is outside the walls. We're going to have students, it's called, it's not virtual learning, but we'll have students who take their books and they'll study their books, and then they'll go online and get a video of the teacher giving their presentation, so that they're not bound by walls or by the clock. So our biggest dilemma right now, believe it or not, in distance learning is we have a different time clock schedule than Xavier has, or than Little Chute has, or another district with different clocks. So we have kids who will stand up in the middle of a math class and go to the Cascade Distance Learning Lab and learn there, and they'll come back and pick up what they missed in math. They'll be going, it'll be unbound by time in those borders. That's where I see us going. Whether they're learning at home or learning at school, there will be a whole, we need to get rid of, now I'm editorializing, but not like it wasn't before. we need to get rid of second grade designation. This student's in second grade, this one's in third grade. Doesn't mean anything anymore. This student might be in second grade because he or she is 6 or 7 years old, but holy smokes, they're learning a 4th grade curriculum. So why do we call them a second grade student? You know, we need to, where are they in their learning? That's where they are in our schools. And teachers are here. You know that you have students moving in and out of your class from math and reading at all different levels. We need to get to the day where there are no more second graders. There are students who are at this point or at this point in their education. And that goes through high school. Learning in and out of school, getting college credits while they're in high school. We've got that going on, but it'll happen to a greater degree. Is that kind of? Yeah. We're going to look very different. I think 10 years from now, we're going to look very different than we do now. That rate of change is going to accelerate. No other reason than it has to because of financial and other concerns. Yes?
Do these voucher schools include religious schools? And if so, are there a variety of religions?
They are. Do voucher schools include religious schools? And if they do, are they a variety of schools? Answer is yes, they do. I can name some of the schools for you that are voucher schools. These are the ones that, well, you all know what happened to my glasses. So. These are the ones that were kicked out of the program where we gave money to and we didn't get it back. Learning Bridges Kingdom Academy, $1.26 million. Life Skills, $2.3 million. Dr. Brenda Noash Choice School, $7.29 million. Those are some of the schools. John Fisher Academy, Kindergarten Plus, the Applecrest Preparatory Leadership Academy, Margaret Howard Christian Leadership Institute, Mills Christian Academy. Those are the schools, voucher schools who failed. Yes.
But I mean, are there other religions like Muslim religions and other religions besides Christian?
Definitely. Yes, there is no limit to what type of religion they are. They're not confined to a particular religion. No. And some of these names, I'm guessing some might be Muslim schools. Niles?
What has the district found as far as the supply and demand of teachers?
It ebbs and flows, over the years. By the way, I should have told you, I've been in this business in Waupaca 23 years. I had 4 years of superintendent experience before that in Oakfield. And I was a music teacher for 10 years before that in Oakfield. So that's my experience that I bring to the table here. And over time, I don't even remember your question.
Teacher availability.
Oh, that's right.
You don't doubt that you've been in all of
What about teacher availability? Yeah, it ebbs and flows. Over the years, we've had 30 to 40 applicants. Right now, I would say that the answer to your question is yes and no. We have certain levels of certain subject areas where we get a good number of people applying for the position. We have some high school particular subject areas that are getting more and more difficult to find teachers. As we get smaller, we need to start looking at teachers who teach math and science, or teach different types of science or different types of social studies. Not just we used to be able to say we need a science teacher, but now we're trying to look for dual certifications and things like that. That gets harder. Yes, Diane?
Have you experienced, has the Waupaca School District experimented at all? Are they participating in reverse teaching, reverse learning, whatever that thing is, that we have started to read?
Yeah, we haven't formally. I know what that's called. Have we participated or started in flip classrooms? Yes. We know about them. We're looking at them. I'm guessing that some teachers are experimenting along those lines, but nothing formal has come out from me or to me at this point. Diane?
I have another question about the school nurses.
This is your last one.
What do you mean to me because of orders? Are you telling us that you had one school nurse for the entire school district, elementary, middle, and high school until this year?
That is correct.
I'm trusting that there are other adults in each of the schools who are trained in EpiPens and all of that sort of thing, and what kind of a formal training program is required?
Absolutely. We have health aides at the districts who are trained by our nurse and only allowed to do what our nurse allows them to do, but they worked under her guidance. Yeah, as you know, as you saw, the numbers are getting higher and higher, and we're on to a second nurse now. Yes, Ann, your turn.
Thank you. Does the state provide any financial assistance to families that use homeschooling, either in cash or curriculum resources or anything else?
Not that I'm aware of. No, they do not, and they are not held accountable either. But we cannot go to a home school and say, are you really teaching this curriculum? How are your kids doing? So we can't do that, but the state does not give any resources that way. No. Yes, Kate?
I'll just stand up, Carol, people can hear. In terms of Patrick's question about K-4 now, the
4K.
Yeah, 4K coming into the school district. There's been a lot of information in news recently about the education of children from birth through age 5 and the importance of that development. Is there any way the school district encourages parents who have younger children in terms of the reading? Is there outreach at all in that respect?
We do not have an outreach. Before we went to 4K, by the way, does everybody know that we now have a 4K kindergarten, 4-year-old kindergarten program? It's a community-based program which allows our kids to go to a daycare, say Sunny Day, and they hire a teacher, and we compensate Sunny Day for that teacher to teach the 4K curriculum. So students can go to the daycare, stay there all day, and get the 4K. We don't have to bus them into school and bus them back. We have 3 programs going on in our schools, and I think we have 5 programs going on in the community, from Sunny Day to Learning Cottage to the title. Trinity, yes. Yeah. Yes. Oh, no.
I'm just going to remind you, because I know when you get home you'll say, oh my gosh, there were teachers there, and Pat Fair was there, and I forgot to recognize them especially.
Thank you. We do have a number of teachers here and a board member. I will recognize Pat Fair, a former teacher but a current board member. Pat, thank you for being here tonight. And
How about asking the teachers to stand up?
yeah, I'm gonna ask them to do that. Would the teachers please stand up, because
All the school employees.
yes. Thank you. You'll get your checks in the mail tomorrow. I should point out that along those same lines that the reason we do well as a school district is not the financial stuff that I gave you. The reason, if we could be the best in the world financially, if we didn't have good teachers carrying out the instruction in the classrooms, we'd be nowhere. So thank you to the teachers. They're the ones who make it happen and makes Waupaca look good, so that when you walk out of that high school with a Waupaca high school diploma, it actually means something because of those people. Thank you very much for your attention. Luther, anything to add?
Well, there's lots of stuff to add.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Or correct. Let me put it that way.
You're right. I mean, when we do the research, the most important thing determining how well a student does is the effectiveness of the teaching. It's more important than class size. It's more important than years of experience. It's more important than credentials. And that's why the state has come up with this teacher effectiveness to really go in and evaluate how teaching is going on with every teacher in the state of Wisconsin. And more importantly, then take that information and give them professional development so that they can get even better. And that's how we're going to get better as a state and as a country. So it's an important thing. The question was about, is school going to change? It is definitely going to change. I am on a committee that you shouldn't have asked me.
That's all right.
That's looking at,
I don't want to hear from you later.
I got 5 minutes, well, I won't take that one. A committee that's studying international education, because we are looking at countries that do well on the PISA examination, and that test is given to 15-year-olds throughout the world. And we don't do as good as we should. And that's one of the reasons we're doing Common Core, that's why we're doing things. But what's really interesting in studying international education is we do everything just the opposite of the states that do much better than us. They have real rigorous standards for being a teacher. Very rigorous to get into the profession. They also pay their teachers well, very well, compared to the average population, and they have large class sizes. What do we do in our country? I hate to say this, but it's really easy to be a teacher. I mean, to get into pre-service education, you can do that. You can get an alternative license even to do that. We don't pay them as well as we should, and we have small class sizes. And one of the things that's interesting is I heard a gentleman, I was in Boston here a little while ago, talking about this, and we had a gentleman from Finland. And in Finland, they did a survey of young people and said, when you grow up, what profession do you want your spouse to be? And if you ask that question in our country, they'd probably say, well, maybe a Green Bay Packer, but that's only Wisconsin, but a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. A majority of the students said, we want our spouse to be a teacher because they were well respected, they were well paid, and the rigorous to get into the profession, they would have a job as long as they wanted. I was with a teacher from Germany this morning in Ripon for a couple hours, and in Germany, to be a teacher, it's very, very rigorous. You go through school, then you do 2 years of student teaching, and then once you get a permanent job, you have a job until you're 63 years old. But it's very, very difficult to be a teacher. And what's you talked about declining enrollments and stuff, they're not really hiring teachers full-time for that because their population is going down. They're sort of like China, where their schools are getting smaller and they're worried that they're not going to have the kids. But the reason I came tonight is I have a lot of respect for David. He's a good administrator, and I do a lot of stuff in education, and I wanted to hear what people in Waupaca thought about the hot topics. And you hit the hot topics, and we can talk about this stuff for days on end, and I do. But I won't tonight. But it's the most important thing we do in the state of Wisconsin. It's where 40% of our budget goes, and we have to make sure that we are preparing our boys and girls for jobs that don't even exist and are able to compete with kids from not just in Minnesota and Iowa and Illinois, but around the world. And we're going to have to change how we do business, and it's going to be difficult, and it's going to take us all working together to do that. So anyway, thanks for what you're doing, David.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave.
Can I have one final comment? Please don't go away with the impression that I think everything about education can be measured on a paper and pencil test. Okay, it can't. We do very well in Wisconsin and the United States in teaching creativity and teaching people to think. We do that very well. We have people from other countries coming here to say, how do you do that? So let's not forget that part of the equation as well. It's too easy to focus on the pencil and paper and here are the numbers, but let's remember that, and I don't know the statistic, but if you look at the number of patents that are approved, they're all from our country. There aren't any from other countries. They're not as creative as we are. So let's not forget that, and I don't mean to talk about testing all the time when there is that whole other side that's important. Thank you for having me.
We thank you very much.